Hi, my name is Mike McAllister. 3 years ago, I was sitting where you are right now. I'd been invited to the Young Life banquet by a friend of mine, and I didn't know what Young Life was, but I went anyway. I was 23 years old back then and in the military. And that night, for the very first time, I heard about Young Life, and surprisingly, my life began to change. I knew I didn't just want to be a donor. I wanted to be a Young Life leader. So I met with Josh Lloyd, the area director back then, for an interview. And then he introduced me to Clifford, and they trained me. And then they placed me as a Young Life leader at Northeast High School. I remember the first club I ever went to was not what I was expecting. It was unlike any youth group I'd ever been to. The kids were acting crazy, and they weren't sitting in nice little rows waiting for somebody to tell them what to do next. And it just seemed very unstructured. But as I came to realize, it was actually very structured, intentionally almost like organized chaos. So a few months later, in the fall of 2010, I walked into a lunchroom. I was nervous as always and not sure who I was going to sit down with or talk to. During the second lunch, I sat down at the second table in the fifth row, and I began a conversation with a kid named Brad. He thought it was strange that an older man would want to come to his school and hang out with him. But he was glad to have somebody to talk to. And so I continued going back, and during second lunch, I sat at the second table in the fifth row once a week over the next few weeks. And we continued to talk more. And eventually, he told me about his dad who flew helicopters in the Army, about his sister who had a baby on the way, and about how many times he'd fallen asleep in class that day. And I continued to go back, and during second lunch, I sat at the second table in the fifth row to talk to Brad. And eventually, he introduced me to Aaron, Dominic, Devin, and Dylan, his friends. And they all thought I was really weird at first, but I continued to go back. And during second lunch, I sat at the second table in the fifth row. A few months and a couple bribes later, I finally convinced them to hang out with me outside of school. And that Saturday, after what had been about a year and a half of lunches, I got in my car, I picked them up, and we went bowling. A few months later, I finally convinced them to come to a Young Life club. I told them that they would love it. They didn't. That was strike one. And then a little while after that, Brad moved away. And that was strike two. And things have changed since Brad left. He was kind of their leader. But since then, I've continued to do what I've always done. I've gone to Northeast High School, and during the second lunch, I've sat at the second table in the fifth row. Sometimes Aaron will call me up to play basketball so that he can escape his home life. And Dominic calls me up to hang out just about any time his parents will let him leave the house. But they refuse to do campaigners. They've only been to a handful of Young Life clubs. Camp? Forget about it. They don't like Young Life. Some days I'm not even sure if they like me. And they certainly don't love Jesus. And there's not going to be a kid walking out of that curtain to stand next to me. But that's okay. Because as a Young Life leader, I know what's important is loving kids the way that Jesus loves me. And Jesus keeps coming back for me again and again, regardless of how many times I reject him. So this Friday, I'm going to get into my car. I'm going to drive to Northeast High School. And when the bell rings, I'll be sitting with the guys in the second lunch at the second table in the fifth row.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Hey, contact work, as you can tell, that's why it's known as the keystone of Young Life. You know, a lot of kids, they don't really remember, as much as we hate to admit it, they don't really remember any of the club talks we give or how good the music went or every little thing about camp, but they do remember one thing 20 years from now, and that's how well and how much the Young Life leader loved them. So that's why contact work is so special. Hey, for the next couple of minutes, you're going to hear from our keynote speaker tonight. His name is John Vickery. He's been on Young Life staff for the past 33 years. The last 12 years, he's been the vice president of the Southern Division of the United States. Him and his wife, Carol, and their 3 sons live in Nashville, Tennessee. So if you would, help me welcome John Vickery.
Thanks, Zach. Is there a podium? Can you pull that up? Great. Thank you. I'm more comfortable with something to hide behind, so